The grid does not announce its collapse with a siren. It happens with a click, a sudden, heavy drop in ambient frequency, the death of a refrigerator's hum, and then silence. In the first 60 minutes of a major blackout, millions of households across the developed world make the exact same sequence of decisions. They check their routers, they look out the window, they open their phones, but within those identical 60 minutes, an invisible divergence occurs. Two identical houses on the same suburban street will live two entirely different realities over the next 72 hours. By day 2, the first house will run out of running water. They will stand over their kitchen sink, twisting a plastic handle, listening to the dry, hollow hiss of a depressurized municipal line. By day 3, they will drag a trash black bag to the curb, heavy with $300 of spoiled meat and rotting dairy, throwing away a freezer full of food they thought was safe. They will make every phone call a little too late, staring at a screen that says no service while the battery ticks down to 4%. The second house will not. The difference between these two families isn't a $5,000 solar array. It isn't a bunker buried in the backyard or a 10-year supply of military-grade rations. The difference is 11 specific moves executed in a precise tactical order while the window of opportunity is still open. One of these moves costs absolutely nothing and instantly expands a household's food supply by 3 full days. Another move, the final one, acts as an analog intelligence filter, telling you whether you are facing a temporary 3-hour local fault or a systemic 3-week regional catastrophe, long before any official spokesperson steps in front of a camera to state the obvious. This is not a guide on survivalism. It is an autopsy of human behavior under sudden systemic stress. We live in an era where the margin of safety built into modern infrastructure has worn razor thin. The systems that keep our water flowing, our food cold, and our screens glowing are masterpiece designs of just-in-time logistics. But remove the current, and the clock starts ticking backward toward the pre-industrial age at a terrifying velocity. The human brain is poorly wired for this transition. When the environment suddenly alters, our default setting is denial. We wait for the lights to come back on. We sit in the dark, scrolling through dwindling bars of LTE, assuming someone, somewhere, is fixing it. That assumption is the trap. The 11 moves we are breaking down today are designed to exploit the brief period of residual stability that exists immediately after a system failure. It is about understanding that a blackout is not a static state of being dark. It is a dynamic cascading event. The choices made in the first 60 minutes govern the resources available on day 3. To understand how to survive the collapse of the network, you must first learn how to read it. And that brings us to the very top of the list. Number 11. The 60-second assessment. To understand why the modern grid fails so predictably, we have to look at the anatomy of its design. It is the largest interconnected machine ever built by humanity, yet it operates with zero storage capacity. Electricity must be consumed the exact millisecond it is generated. This creates a perpetual balancing act, where utility operators must match supply to demand across thousands of miles of high-voltage transmission lines. When a catastrophic failure occurs, it is rarely the result of a single isolated incident. It is almost always a cascade, a chain reaction of automated safety switches, tripping to protect multi-million-dollar transformers from melting down under sudden imbalances. The historical precedent for this is well documented. On August 14, 2003, a software bug in an alarm system at First Energy Corporation in Ohio went unnoticed. A few high-voltage power lines brushed against overgrown trees, tripped out of service, and triggered a massive, unmanaged redistribution of electricity across the northeast United States and parts of Canada. Within just a few hours, 50 million people were left without power. Cellular networks collapsed within minutes due to battery backup failures at base stations. Water treatment plants in Cleveland, Detroit, and New York lost pumping pressure, forcing authorities to issue boil water advisories for days. The economic damage topped $6 billion, and at least 93 deaths were linked directly to the event. The vulnerability exposed in 2003 was not fixed. It was merely patched. The geographic reality of the modern utility network creates inherent traps. Urban and suburban centers are entirely dependent on long-distance transmission corridors that funnel power from remote generation stations. These corridors cross rugged terrain, dense forests, and regions increasingly prone to severe weather anomalies. If a major substation along a critical corridor fails, local authorities cannot simply switch to a secondary source. The infrastructure does not allow for it. In the winter storm of February 2021, the Texas power grid, managed by ERCOT, came within 4 minutes and 37 seconds of a total catastrophic collapse that would have taken months to repair. As temperatures plummeted, natural gas generation units froze, wind turbines iced over, and demand skyrocketed. The frequency of the entire grid dropped dangerously below the 60 Hz standard. Operators were forced to initiate rolling blackouts that left over 4.5 million customers in freezing darkness, resulting in over 240 fatalities and hundreds of billions of dollars in infrastructure destruction. This brings us to number 10 on our list. Giving your phone exactly one job. During the 2021 Texas freeze and the 2003 Northeast blackout, cellular towers were overwhelmed within the first 15 minutes. When the power goes out, the immediate psychological reaction of the population is to seek information. Millions of people open data-heavy applications simultaneously. This sudden surge creates a digital bottleneck, rendering mobile internet useless even if the towers remain functional. Furthermore, standard cellular towers only carry enough backup battery power to operate for roughly 2 to 4 hours. Once those batteries drain, the towers go completely dark. The percentage displayed on your phone screen at the moment of the outage is a finite resource that cannot be easily replenished. In every major utility failure report compiled by emergency management agencies, a recurring pattern emerges. Citizens who exhaust their phone batteries in the early hours by attempting to stream news broadcasts, refresh social media feeds, or make repeated voice calls are left completely isolated when the true crisis peaks on day 2 or 3. The technical reality is that a standard short message service, or SMS text, uses a minute fraction of the bandwidth and battery power required for a voice call or data stream. Text messages are packaged into tiny data packets that can slip through congested cellular control channels when standard voice networks fail. By immediately dropping screen brightness, shutting down background applications, activating the maximum power-saving mode, and restricting the device entirely to essential, short text communications, a household preserves its only connection to the outside world. The second, immediate threat following a grid failure is the rapid loss of municipal water pressure, which brings us to number 9, capturing water before the pressure drops. Urban water systems rely heavily on electric pumps to move water from reservoirs into high-elevation storage tanks, which then use gravity to distribute water to individual households. When the primary electrical grid fails, these pumping stations switch to diesel backup generators. However, these backup systems are designed for short-term disruptions, not prolonged outages. If the fuel supply for the generators cannot be replenished due to regional transport disruptions, or if the backup systems fail to start due to maintenance issues, the pumps stop. Once the pumps stop, the water remaining in the elevated storage tanks begins to drain into the lower-lying parts of the network. For households located on hills or in upper floors of apartment buildings, water pressure drops to 0 almost instantly. For homes in lower elevations, water may continue to flow for a short period, but as the volume in the tanks decreases, the pressure throughout the entire system bleeds off. This drop in pressure creates a secondary, highly dangerous phenomenon known as backsiphonage. When pressure drops inside a water main, a partial vacuum is created. This vacuum can draw contaminated groundwater, soil, and agricultural runoff through small cracks or joints in the aging underground pipe network directly into the clean water supply. This is why public health departments issue immediate boil water orders following a major blackout. The household that fails to fill clean storage containers in the first 60 minutes is left with 2 equally hazardous options: drinking contaminated water or relying on empty taps. The transition from a short-term inconvenience to a severe public safety crisis occurs between hour 12 and hour 48 of a sustained infrastructure failure. At this stage, the internal thermal dynamics of residential structures begin to register the absence of automated climate control, and the limits of household food preservation are tested. According to data from the United States Department of Agriculture, A standard residential freezer will maintain its core temperature for approximately 48 hours if it remains completely full and tightly sealed. If the freezer is only half full, that window drops to 24 hours. This reality underpins number 8 on our list. Treating the freezer like a vault. Every time a resident opens a refrigerator or freezer door during a power outage to inspect the contents, an immediate exchange of air masses occurs. The heavy cold air rushes out from the bottom of the compartment, replaced instantly by warm, humid ambient air from the room. This thermal exchange rapidly accelerates the melting of ice crystals within the food items, driving the internal temperature toward the danger zone of 40 degrees Fahrenheit, the threshold where harmful bacterial growth begins. The economic impact of this behavior is significant. Insurance industry statistics indicate that during the 2012 Hurricane Sandy blackout, which left more than 8 million customers without power across 15 states, residential food spoilage accounted for tens of millions of dollars in direct losses, much of which could have been mitigated by strict containment protocols. As the outage extends into the winter months, the primary physical threat shifts from food preservation to thermal survival, bringing us to number 7. Heating one room instead of the entire house. The laws of thermodynamics dictate that heat energy naturally migrates toward colder spaces. In a typical suburban home with an open floor design and multiple exterior walls, trying to maintain an even temperature across 2,000 square feet without a furnace is impossible. The structural mass rapidly bleeds heat through windows, doors, and uninsulated attic spaces. By closing off all non-essential rooms, sealing door gaps with towels, and isolating the household within a single, small interior space, residents can leverage human metabolic heat production. An average adult at rest generates approximately 100 watts of heat energy. In a small insulated room, the combined thermal output of 4 individuals is sufficient to keep the ambient temperature well above freezing, even when the outside temperature drops into the teens. However, the pursuit of warmth frequently introduces the most lethal element of a blackout: carbon monoxide poisoning. Data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention shows that following major grid failures, emergency rooms experience a predictable surge in carbon monoxide exposure cases, frequently resulting in fatalities. In the aftermath of the 2020 major storms and subsequent outages in Louisiana, more deaths were attributed to improper generator usage and indoor charcoal grilling than to the physical impact of the weather itself. Carbon monoxide is a colorless, odorless, and tasteless gas produced by the incomplete combustion of hydrocarbon fuels. When portable gasoline generators are placed in garages, on enclosed porches, or too close to residential air intakes, the gas builds up silently. It binds to human hemoglobin with an affinity 200 times greater than oxygen, causing rapid cellular asphyxiation. The medical reality is absolute. Combustion engines and charcoal units must remain outdoors, at least 20 feet away from any structure. This critical need for safety and resource management extends directly into number 6. Lighting the room you are using and nothing else. The standard response to darkness is the deployment of open flame candles. Fire department logs across major urban centers confirm that residential structure fires spike sharply during blackouts. The combination of unfamiliar darkness, cluttered spaces, and open flames creates a high-risk environment. Furthermore, candles consume oxygen and emit particulate matter, which degrades air quality within a sealed, unventilated room. Modern emergency management protocols mandate the use of light-emitting diode technology, specifically headlamps and low-wattage lanterns. LEDs convert energy into light far more efficiently than incandescent bulbs, consuming a fraction of the battery reserve. By concentrating light sources exclusively on active tasks and keeping non-essential areas dark, a household extends its finite battery reserves from hours to weeks. By day 2, the operational status of the household hinges entirely on nutrient consumption sequencing, which brings us to number 5. Eating the fridge before touching the pantry. The financial and caloric waste observed in typical disaster scenarios is driven by improper sequencing. When individuals panic, they instinctively reach for shelf-stable dry goods and canned items because these resources require no refrigeration and represent psychological comfort. Consequently, the highly perishable and nutrient-dense items located in the refrigerator, such as open dairy, cooked meats, and fresh produce, are allowed to spoil inside the dark appliance. The correct operational protocol requires the immediate consumption or preservation of these items within the first 24 hours. Leftovers and soft cheeses must be consumed first. As the freezer begins to soften, the proteins must be cooked immediately using outdoor propane or charcoal equipment before the internal temperature exceeds 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Only when all perishable items have been exhausted or processed should the household break the seals on its long-term, shelf-stable pantry reserves. This strict adherence to chronological degradation transforms what would normally be discarded waste into a highly effective 3-day caloric extension, preserving the true survival reserves for the unpredictable tail end of the crisis.